My name is Aaron Edwards with Santos Springs. Welcome to this week's edition of the Friday Field Report South America. It is October 24th, 2025. Brazil soybean planting is behind pace. Some areas are getting rain, but there's some dry areas down there. There's a lot to cover. So let's jump into this week's content. We're going to start talking about weather, then we'll talk a little bit about planting. If you remember last week, if you were following, let me get a marker here to mark this up. Let's make this red. If you remember last week, we basically were talking north to south Brazil had basically widespread rains. That was the expectation. And yeah, they did get rains if you look at the observed rain over the last week, but it was a lot spottier than expected. It wasn't quite as dominant of rainfall as what was expected last week, which brings us to our planting progress. I had said last week that I thought we would have planting get caught up. I thought it was very possible. And this is the it's in Portuguese. Don't worry, you don't need to practice your Portuguese. I'll let you know what you need to know, but these 12 states represent 96% of the soybean area in Brazil. So these are the top producers. And they were behind last week. I said I thought they would play catch up because a lot of farmers would try to plant before the rains. But they are still behind. That was a surprise on this week's report. Let's look down here. How far behind are they? Where the historic average, the 5-year average, is they would be 27.7% planted. They're sitting at 21.7% planted. So that's 6 percentage points behind the historic average. Let's drill into that a little bit region by region. We'll stay in blue and we'll do southern Brazil. These 3 states are southern Brazil. There we go. The state of Paraná, which is a very important producer, right on pace. The state of Rio Grande do Sul, another very important producer. They are actually a little bit ahead of schedule because they usually plant more in November. Santa Catarina, which is not as big of a deal, but they are 10 percentage points behind. So maybe I could even make that. I'll just make the ones that are behind in red so we can look at that. So this is red. They're behind. All right. Then there's that northeastern expansion area, the Mato Piba region. And this is important. What I'm going to draw up in green is important because we're going to look at the weather in just a little bit, and it really makes a difference. But these 4 states up here at the top, that's that northeast expansion area. And that just grows year after year. Big operations for the most part, have mid-sized farmers as well. It's important to let's start with their 5-year average. You could tell they're not usually too far along on planting, historically speaking. That being said, they are actually a little bit ahead of pace on these 2 states. And I'm not really going to mark these as red, even though they're behind. It's just they haven't started because they didn't get the rain, these 2. So it's not that huge of a deal. Even though they're technically red, I'm not going to make a big deal out of that. Now I want to clean up this chart a little bit. That's kind of the northeast and then the southern Brazil. Let me clean this up a little bit because we want to focus in on both of, a little bit of Goiás, but also Mato Grosso. Let's get these in yellow. Mato Grosso, this is that powerhouse state. And it produces, that was finicky. Mato Grosso is the powerhouse state. A third of Brazil's soybeans are produced in this state. And this is the big red one. This is the one that you need to really pay attention. They are almost still 10 percentage points behind the historic average. That is a big story. So we have the number 1 soybean producer accounts for a third of all of Brazil's soybean production, and they're 10 percentage points behind planting pace. We're going to look at the weather map, and you're going to see that maybe there actually is a story there because, we'll leave the spoiler for when we're looking at the weather map. To the south of Mato Grosso, we'll look at all of these on a map, but I want you to remember especially a lot of these yellow states because we're going to look at it. To the south of Mato Grosso, if you go south, basically straight south, but on the western side, you have the state of Mato Grosso do Sul that kind of unites Paraná to Mato Grosso. That's Mato Grosso do Sul. And then if you look to the southern side of Mato Grosso, but on the eastern side, you have the state of Goiás, and you can really see a tale of kind of two regions. So those are these two states that I mentioned right here. You can see those two regions showing up very clearly. Let's mark this up a little bit differently. So let's do red here, Goiás. This would be to the southeast of Mato Grosso. We'll look at it. They are way behind. Way behind. And then the contrast to the southwest of Mato Grosso, southwest, they're just a little bit behind. So it is red, but only about 3 percentage points. And we're going to look at the weather in just a little bit. So I want to let's look at a map because I want you to remember some of these states. It's just interesting to go over it. Okay, here we go. Let me slow down here so we can get all of these regions. Let's start with that northeastern expansion region. We'll do it in yellow. These 4 states here, this region here, that's what's known as Mato P. I'm running out of space. Let me make that smaller. These 4 states are Mato P. And that was the area, those first 4 states that I pointed out. It's just early for them to be planting. Typical planting is more November. So very, very dry, but they also don't have forecasted rain for the next week. So maybe there's not a story, but they're going to start falling behind if they don't get rainfall soon. But guess what? No rain is expected. So they're already a little bit behind. They're probably going to be, I don't know how much will be planted in the dust. It depends on forecasts, but it'll be interesting to see what happens there. They're a little bit behind. There's no rain forecasted. The more dramatic story, and I'll put this in red here, Goiás is a major producer, and they have no rain expected for the next week in the northern part. Okay rain in the southern part, but it's not great. They produce about 10% of Brazil's soybeans. Then this state here of Mato Grosso, if we box it in, they account for about 30% of Brazil's soybean production. And you can see parts of it in the middle are okay. But this whole side here, also no forecasted rain. So if we're looking at percentages of area, just so we can kind of tally it up, this area is, depending on estimates, 10 to 15% of production. This area is half of Goiás. It's probably about 5% of production. And then this here, again, maybe this would be about 10% of production. But you could see there's probably a quarter, maybe 30% of Brazil's soybean area that is behind. And they also don't have rain forecasted for this week. So I'm not sure I could full out say there's a bullish story there. But if a 30-year crop's behind planting, still no rain, maybe we're not quite feeling it as a bullish story, but there's at least pretty big potential for a bullish story coming out of that, either in the form of reduced acreage. We just didn't get it in because it was too dry and prices are bad, and I'm not going to risk bad prices, and I just didn't get it in because I'm not going to do with it. I'll go plant corn or something like that, or some other crop. There's also potentially a story on some reduced acreage for double crop. And then I didn't give much attention to southern Brazil, but the main story here, adequate rainfall, and I also included Paraguay for you geography buffs. You might, I'm not confused. It was on purpose, right? Paraguay. The story there is rain is okay. Temperatures are lower than expected, and it's just not quite getting into gear. The crop isn't just quite getting into gear the way they would like it to develop. So the farmers that I've talked with in southern Brazil, it's like, it's raining, we're planting, it's okay, not thrilled. Some of the happiest farmers that I've talked to down there are in this state of, where is it here, Mato Grosso do Sul, where temperatures are warmer, rainfall has been adequate. They were able to plant a little bit ahead of pace. So there's definitely good places. You could see pictures of it. They're a little bit delayed, and it'll be very interesting to see if they can get over the hump and get caught up. But the decision that farmers have down there, you want to get caught up, you're going to be planting in the dust. Do you really want to plant in the dust? Prices are weak. Cash is tight. Is this a year that you risk it in the dust, or is this a year that you just pump the brakes and say, I'm going to wait and make sure I have a good crop? So there's a lot of moving parts down there. I had talked a little bit about the Argentina story, about how they exported a lot and potentially they would be buying more out of Paraguay or Brazil. I mentioned that last week. Just a little bit of an update there. We have seen cash bids kind of in a wave effect. They picked up a little bit in Paraguay. They actually picked up pretty good in Paraguay. Starting to see a little bit of that coming into Brazil. So there is evidence of demand for soybeans, both out of Argentina and then just the export market. Basis levels still aren't really exciting in Brazil, but there's kind of what we thought there might be a pull to kind of that region, Paraguay, parts of western Paraná and southern Mato Grosso do Sul. We're seeing a little bit of that pull on basis, not quite as much as we would have maybe expected, but it's only been 1 week. So that's just a little bit of an update there. Keeping a close eye on it. I'm not going to full out say there's a bullish story yet, but we might be getting close there on the soybeans. And you have to remember, the rounded number that I keep in mind is, will Brazil be 30% planted on soybeans by the end of October? Because that's a little bit of a thumbs up, thumbs down on their potential for double crop corn acres. So unless they can go plant about 10% of their crop in the next week, and you have to remember, part of Brazil is expecting rain, so will you be able to get the crop in if it's raining? And part of Brazil is not. It's dry, but if you could plant, fine, but it's in the dust and it's just doesn't have the soil moisture, and there's a risk to planting in those conditions as well. So can Brazil get to that 30% mark by next week? That'll be an interesting thing that we're watching. Hope you have a great weekend. Reach out if you have any questions, and we will be in touch.